Obese girl, pushed off cliff by Stepfamily. Mountain man caught her, made her his queen. Closer to the edge, Ava. Don't be difficult, Constance cooed, her sweetness a blade wrapped in silk. Evangeline Ashford obeyed because obedience had been beaten into her since childhood. Wind climbed the cliff face in cold, hungry hands, tugging at her worn hem, worrying her balance. Below, the gorge opened like a blackened mouth. Behind her, the family she never chose assembled a tableau of polite cruelty. Lucinda's painted smile, Beatrice's bored amusement, Malcolm's jaw working as if chewing on a secret. "I don't like heights," Ava whispered. "Please, here's fine." "Always afraid," Lucinda sighed. "How exhausting." "Perhaps the view is better one step more," Beatrice said, head tilting, green eyes bright with mischief that wasn't mischief at all. Malcolm moved. A shadow cut across the stone. A palm pressed between Ava's shoulder blades. The world snapped. Her heels slid. Her lungs locked. For one white-hot instant, she saw them. Her mother's wedding brooch on Constance's collar. Lucinda's gloved fingers adjusting a curl. Beatrice's lips parting in a small O of delighted shock. Malcolm's eyes refusing to meet hers, and knew the truth she'd tried to bury. This wasn't clumsiness. This was a decision. "Don't," Ava said. It left her mouth like a prayer, like a child's last bargain with the night. The wind answered. She fell. Stone scraped her palm. A jut of root raked her hip. The sky wheeled, a carousel of color and cold, and somewhere above, footsteps retreated. Conspirators hurrying to invent a story about an unfortunate slip. Ava's mind flashed through small, stubborn memories, the lemon biscuits her father taught her to bake, the hymn she loved, though she never dared sing loudly, the secret she kept for herself alone, that tenderness was a kind of courage. And then the cliff face blurred as gravity gathered her in its arms. A branch tore free. The drop doubled. The gorge rose, and then she hit him. Not rock, not river, arms, a chest like a door of seasoned oak. The breath was knocked from her, but life, miraculous and warm, stayed. They tumbled across a bed of pine and moss, a flurry of broken needles and startled birds, until the man took the brunt of the roll, turning his body to shield hers. "Easy," a voice said, low as thunder beyond the ridge. "I've got you." She blinked through tears and grit. The face above her came into shape. Weather-browned skin, a jaw rough with dark stubble, eyes the green of spruce boughs after rain. He smelled of smoke and iron, cold water and clean earth. "Can you breathe?" he asked. Ava nodded, a small stunned movement. The ache in her ankle flared, fear spiked, then softened under the steadiness of his gaze. "My name is Jace," he said. "You're safe now." Up on the cliff, her past rehearsed a lie. Down here, cradled against a stranger's heartbeat, her future inhaled. When Ava woke again, it was to the soft crackle of fire and the scent of pine smoke. For a long moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then her hand brushed coarse wool instead of silk, and her body reminded her pain in her ankle, ache in her ribs, the memory of wind screaming past her ears. She was alive. The cabin around her was small but sturdy, built from thick logs blackened by years of smoke. Animal pelts hung on the walls. A kettle hissed quietly over the flames. And beside her, on a rough-hewn chair, sat the man who had caught her. He looked different in lamplight, still immense, but human now. Lines of wear etched the corners of his eyes, and a faint scar crossed his right temple. His clothes were patched hide, his hands scarred from work. Yet There was gentleness in the way he sat, forearms on his knees, as though keeping watch rather than standing guard. "You're awake?" he said when she stirred. His voice was deep, calm, unhurried. "Don't move too much. Your ankle's bad." She blinked, her throat raw. "Where am I?" "In my home," he said. "The forest above Ravenswood. I found you near the gorge." Her mind flashed with memory, the push, the laughter, the sudden absence of ground beneath her feet. She sat up abruptly, gasping. "The cliff! My family!" "Shh!" Jace raised a hand. "You're safe here. Whoever they are, they won't find you soon." Tears gathered in her eyes, hot and helpless. "They tried to kill me." He didn't ask why. Not yet. He just nodded once, like a man who already understood more about cruelty than words could tell. "You'll tell me when you're ready. Right now, you need to eat." He poured something steaming into a tin cup and handed it to her. The smell was strong, meat broth, herbs, a hint of wild onion. Her stomach clenched in hunger she hadn't felt for days. "Careful," he warned as she drank. "It's hot." Ava obeyed, sipping slowly, the warmth sliding down her throat and settling in her chest. You saved me." "Did what anyone should," Jace said. Then, almost to himself, "though most wouldn't have been there to see." He moved to the fire, stirred the pot, and added wood. In the orange glow, his shoulders looked carved from stone. "You'll need to rest a few weeks," he said without turning. "That ankle won't carry you far." "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. At that, he faced her fully. The shadows deepened the green in his eyes. "Then you'll stay here until you do." Over the next few days, the rhythm of Jace's life became hers. Mornings began with the hiss of the kettle and the pale light spilling through frosted glass. He'd bring her water, help her sit up, make her tea from dried herbs that smelled of mint and smoke. He spoke little, but his silence wasn't cold. It was the kind that left space for breathing. When she winced from pain, he was there before she called, adjusting the bandage or propping her leg higher. On the third evening, when the fever in her ankle broke, she found courage to ask, "Why do you live here alone?" Jace hesitated, gaze fixed on the fire. "People and I don't fit well." "Why not?" He gave a dry half-smile. "Because I don't pretend." His honesty startled her. She wanted to ask more, but his expression warned her off. So instead she said, "I used to think pretending was the only way to survive." He looked at her then, really looked, past the bruises, the fear, into the hollow where her belief in kindness used to live. "You don't have to pretend here." Something in her broke softly at those words. No one had ever said them before. By the end of the week, she could stand with a crutch Jace had carved from birch. When she thanked him, he only nodded. "You'll walk on your own soon?" Outside, the world stretched wild and endless. Mountains rolled toward the horizon. A stream glinted silver in the sun. She breathed the crisp air, feeling it fill corners of her lungs that grief had long claimed. Jace stood a few steps away, adjusting the snare line near the tree line. "You shouldn't go too far," he said. "The forest's kind to no one who rushes it." "I won't," she promised. But part of her wanted to test how far freedom could reach before fear pulled it back. When she glanced at him again, he was watching her, not with ownership, but with quiet assurance, as though he'd guard her until she learned to guard herself. And for the first time since the push, Since the scream that had torn her voice raw, Ava felt the first fragile thread of safety weave itself through her heart. Autumn deepened in the mountains. The air grew sharper. The trees bled color into gold and crimson, and each morning the grass glittered with frost. Inside Jace's cabin, the world stayed warm and still, a sanctuary carved from silence and firelight. Ava learned the rhythm of his days. He rose before dawn, the sound of the door creaking open marking his departure into the forest. When he returned, his arms were heavy with firewood or game, his beard glistening with dew. He never came back without something for her. A handful of late berries, a bunch of wild thyme, once even a small book with a broken spine he had found in an abandoned hunter's lodge. "I thought you might like the words," he'd said, setting it on the table before retreating to clean his rifle. Ava had smiled, a rare, fragile thing that felt like stretching a muscle long unused. As her strength returned, so did her curiosity. When Jace worked outside, she would limp to the doorway wrapped in a shawl, watching him split wood. Each swing of the axe was clean and measured, the muscles beneath his shirt flexing like coiled rope. Yet there was no vanity in him, only focus, the quiet competence of a man who'd had to survive by his own hands. One afternoon, she asked, "You never seem afraid of being alone out here." He didn't pause his work. Fear doesn't keep you alive. Paying attention does. And loneliness? The axe bit into the log, the sound echoing through the clearing. "That's something you learn to live with," he said finally. Then softer, "until someone walks into it." Ava lowered her eyes, her cheeks warm despite the chill. At night, they would sit by the fire. She read aloud from the battered book, stories of travelers and oceans, poems about love and loss. Jace would sit quietly, sharpening his knife or mending his traps, though she noticed how his hands always stilled when she reached the softer lines. One night, she finished reading and asked, "Do you ever miss them, the world outside these woods?" He looked up, the fire reflected in his eyes. The world took more than it ever gave. Out here, at least, it asks for honesty. She nodded, understanding more than she could say. The world had taken from her, too, her father, her inheritance, her sense of belonging. But in this cabin, with the steady crackle of the fire and Jace's quiet presence, something small and stubborn began to grow. It wasn't yet hope, but it was close. When the first snow fell, Jace helped her outside. The forest was transformed, every branch powdered white, every breath visible. He built a small sled so she could move around without straining her ankle. She laughed when she saw it. "You built this for me?" He shrugged, faintly embarrassed. "You needed a way to see the woods. I thought you'd like that." "I love it," she said, her eyes bright. "No one's ever made something for me before." He looked away quickly, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift, the smallest, shyest smile. As he pulled her through the snow-covered meadow, she watched his broad back, the movement of his shoulders beneath his coat. The air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, but inside warmth spread like sunlight through frost. When he stopped near a frozen stream, she reached out and touched his sleeve. "Thank you, Jace, for everything." He turned to her, his breath a pale cloud in the air. "You don't owe me thanks. I just did what was right." "No," she said softly. "You did what was kind." For a moment, Neither of them spoke. Only the wind through the pines filled the silence. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. The fire had died down to embers, and Jace was sitting by the window, cleaning his rifle by moonlight. She watched him for a while before whispering, "You don't rest much, do you?" He looked over his shoulder. "Old habit. Easier to stay awake than dream." "Bad dreams?" His expression shifted. Not pain exactly, but the memory of it. "Sometimes," he said simply. Ava hesitated, then reached out a hand. "Sit," she said, "by the fire, please." He obeyed, settling beside her. The light played across his face, the strong lines, the scar that ran along his jaw, the eyes that looked like they had seen both heaven and hell. "I don't know what hurt you," she whispered, "but you don't have to carry it alone." He met her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Maybe I don't." They sat in silence, the distance between them shrinking until her head rested lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his breath deepened, slow, steady, anchoring her. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin, two hearts beat in quiet defiance of everything the world had done to them. By the time the snow melted, Ava's limp had faded, replaced by a strength she'd never known. She moved around the cabin with ease, helping Jace prepare the garden, mending clothes, baking bread that filled the air with the smell of butter and warmth. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, Jace would pause in his work and just watch her, a small smile in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. He had saved her from falling once, but day by day it was she who saved him from staying buried beneath his ghosts. Spring seeped gently into the mountains, slow as breath after a long sleep. The snow thinned, revealing moss and river stones, and the creek near Jace's cabin began to sing again. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the smell of cedar and stew. Inside, life had become something soft, unhurried, and impossibly precious. Ava had learned the rhythm of Jace's silence, when it meant thought, when it meant worry, when it was just peace. She no longer flinched at every sound. Her laughter came easier now, bright and sudden, echoing against the logs like a forgotten song returning home. Each morning she would wake to find a new chore waiting, dough rising in a bowl, herbs drying by the window, a pail of milk left on the table. "You don't have to do all this," she'd tell Jace. He'd just shrug, adjusting the strap of his rifle. "Keeps the day busy." But Ava knew the chores weren't for him. They were for her, a way to stitch her back into the world, one simple kindness at a time. The cabin itself was a small kingdom. There was a heavy oak table that Jace had built by hand, its surface scarred by years of use. 2 chairs, a thick rug near the hearth, shelves lined with jars of preserved fruit, bullets, and wild honey. Outside, chickens clucked lazily near the coop, and a garden patch waited for the thaw. "Teach me," Ava said one morning, standing beside him as he repaired the chicken pen. "If I'm staying here, I should learn." He glanced up, one brow raised. "You plan to stay?" Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "If you'll have me." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even hope, before he returned to hammering the post. "Then you'd better start learning," he said. So she did. She learned how to chop kindling without splintering it, how to mend torn clothes with steady stitches, how to tell edible mushrooms from the ones that whispered death. Jace taught her to fish, to set traps, to track rabbits in snow. He showed her which herbs soothed fever and which ones kept nightmares away. Sometimes, when her fingers fumbled, he'd come close, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back, his breath brushing her temple as he guided her hands. Like this, he'd murmur, his voice rough velvet, and she'd forget the chill of the mountain entirely. Their life together became a language of small gestures. When Jace came in from the cold, Ava would pour him tea before he asked. When she burned her hand on the stove, he bandaged it in silence, his fingers calloused but careful. At night, she would hum softly while mending clothes, and he'd look up from his chair, listening without a word. The walls that had once echoed only with wind now held warmth, laughter, and something deeper, a stillness that belonged to two people who had finally stopped running. One afternoon, while scrubbing the floor, Ava found a small wooden box beneath Jace's bed. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were two worn ribbons, a child's drawing faded by time, and a locket with a tiny portrait of a woman, plump, smiling, with the same kind eyes Jace carried in memory. She closed the box immediately, her heart twisting. She knew this was the ghost that lived behind his quiet eyes. That night, as they sat by the fire, she said softly, "She was beautiful." Jace froze. Then, without surprise, he said, "You found the box? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have looked." He shook his head. "You had a right to see. Elizabeth was my wife, and the girl, Lily, our daughter." The flames painted his face in gold and shadow. "They were my whole world, until the fire." Ava reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it over his. "She must have loved you very much." "She did," he said, voice thick. "But I wasn't enough to save them." "You saved me," Eva whispered. "Maybe that's what she'd have wanted." He looked at her then, something raw and open flickering behind his gaze. Maybe. Days passed, and grief softened into remembrance. Ava began to sing again, quiet songs her father had taught her long ago. One morning, Jace stopped outside the door, listening. When she finished, he said, "That's the first time this house has heard music in years." She smiled shyly. Then it was overdue. That evening, he brought home a fiddle, strings dull and body cracked. "It's been gathering dust in the barn," he said. "Thought maybe you could bring it back to life." It took her 3 days to repair it, and when she finally played, the sound filled the cabin like light spilling through clouds. Jace leaned against the wall, eyes closed, a faint smile ghosting across his face. For the first time, she saw him look peaceful. Summer arrived in a rush of green. They built a small fence around the garden, planted corn, beans, and wildflowers, just because Ava said they made the place feel alive. Jace worked shirtless in the sun, his back glistening with sweat, and Ava pretended not to stare, though sometimes he caught her, and a slow grin would spread across his face before he turned away. That night, she teased, "You know you're impossible to ignore, don't you?" He chuckled, deep and quiet. "Then I'll take that as a good sign." It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, a low, warm sound that made her chest ache with something she didn't yet dare name. Weeks turned into months. Their closeness grew not from grand gestures, but from quiet dependability. The way he always checked her bandages before sleep, the way she always waited by the door when he was late returning from the woods. One evening, A storm rolled in, drenching the forest in silver rain. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls. When thunder cracked too close, Ava startled, and before she realized it, she was pressed against him, her head against his chest. He didn't pull away. His hand came up, tentative but sure, resting on her back. "It's just thunder," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. "I just don't like being alone when it comes." "You're not alone," he said simply. She looked up, and whatever lived between them, patience, gratitude, something deeper, shifted into something undeniable. The firelight flickered across their faces, and for the briefest moment, the world outside ceased to exist. By the time autumn circled back, the cabin had changed. So had they. Ava's cheeks were rosier now, her laughter louder. Jay smiled more often, even teased her when she burned bread or forgot to latch the coop. The grief that once haunted the cabin had retreated, replaced by warmth that felt like home. But peace, they would soon learn, was fragile in a world that never forgave happiness easily. The first sign came with the broken twig. Jace noticed it while checking traps along the northern ridge, a footprint too fresh, too heavy to belong to deer or bear. It pointed toward the valley, toward home. He knelt, fingers brushing the earth. Whoever it was had passed only hours ago. A hunter, maybe, or something worse. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had swallowed the forest. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he saw Ava setting the table, humming softly. The sight should have eased him. It didn't. When he stepped inside, she smiled. "You're late. Supper's getting cold." "Keep it warm," he said quietly, closing the door. "We might have company soon." Her brow furrowed. Company? Tracks, men, too many for wanderers. The color drained from her face. "You think—" "I think someone finally came looking for you." That night, neither slept. Jay sat near the window, rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark. Ava brewed tea, her hands trembling. "They can't know I'm alive," she whispered. "It's been months." "They know," he said. "You're about to inherit something worth killing for. They wouldn't stop until they were sure." Her voice broke. "Then I brought danger to your door." "You brought life," he said firmly, "and I'll be damned before I let anyone take that away." 3 days passed before trouble arrived. A thin mist hung over the valley when the dogs barked, wild, urgent. Jay stepped outside with his rifle. 3 riders were approaching through the trees. He recognized the man in front before the light even caught his face. Malcolm Ashford. The same sneer, the same easy arrogance of a man who thought cruelty was his birthright. Behind him rode 2 hired guns and a wagon carrying a lawyer in a bowler hat. "Well, I'll be," Malcolm drawled as he dismounted. "The lost little piglet survived the fall. I should have guessed fate had a sense of humor." Jace's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say another word like that and you won't finish the sentence." Malcolm's grin faltered, but the lawyer interjected smoothly. "Mr. Thornfield, we're here on legal business. Miss Ashford's estate must be settled. The family only wishes for her to return safely to town." "Funny," Jace said. "That wasn't their wish last time." Ava stepped out onto the porch, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "You tried to kill me. Don't pretend this is about concern." Malcolm chuckled darkly. "You always were dramatic, sister. No one pushed you. You slipped. We all saw it." "You liar," she hissed. He turned his smile on Jace. You think she's some innocent angel? She's a spoiled girl with a fortune that doesn't belong to her. When she turns 25, every penny her grandmother left goes straight to her, unless she's declared missing or dead. That's a shame, isn't it? Jace's voice dropped low. Leave now. You won't get a second warning. Malcolm's gaze flicked to the rifle. You wouldn't shoot me in front of a lady. Jace smiled without warmth. I've buried men for less. The lawyer shifted nervously. Please, let's not resort to violence. Get off my land, Jace said again, cold and final. They left, but not far. Jace watched them disappear into the trees and knew it wasn't over. Wolves rarely left without circling back. That night, Ava couldn't stop shaking. They'll come back, she whispered. They won't stop until they have what they want. Then they'll have to come through me, Jace said. She looked at him, the steadiness in his eyes, the certainty that made her chest ache. Why do you always protect me? He hesitated. Because the world failed you once. I won't let it do it again. Even if it costs you. He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek. Some things are worth the cost. Her breath hitched, but before she could speak, thunder cracked in the distance. No, not thunder. Gunfire. Jace's head snapped toward the door. Stay inside, he ordered, loading his rifle. No matter what happens, don't open that door. The next hour was chaos and firelight. The attackers came at nightfall, Malcolm's hired guns and 2 more men from town, greedy enough to risk death for money. They fired at the cabin, bullets splintering wood. Jace returned fire from the window, his aim unerring, the years of solitude sharpening every reflex. When one man tried to flank the cabin, Ava acted before fear could stop her. She grabbed Jace's second pistol, heavier than she expected, and stepped to the side window. Her hand shook, but she steadied herself, took aim, and fired. The man fell. Her ears rang, heart hammering, but she didn't stop until Jace's hand covered hers. That's enough, he said, his voice low but proud. You did good, sweetheart. By dawn, it was over. The surviving men had fled, dragging Malcolm with them. The ground outside was churned with mud and blood. The lawyer's wagon was gone. Silence returned to the forest. Inside, Ava sat trembling, the pistol still in her lap. I killed a man. Jace knelt before her, taking her hands. You saved your life. You saved mine. Her eyes filled. I didn't want to be that kind of person. You're not, he said softly. You're someone who fought back when the world gave you no choice. For days, she refused to leave the cabin. Jace did what he always did, repaired what was broken. He patched the walls, restocked ammunition, and cooked soup she barely touched. But he didn't push her to talk. One evening, as the sun died behind the mountains, she found him on the porch, sharpening his knife. She stepped outside, the cool air brushing her skin. They'll come again, won't they? Maybe, he said, but next time they won't find us waiting. What do you mean? He turned to her. I'm taking you to town. We'll go to the sheriff, to a judge if we must. You'll claim what's yours. And then, if you still want, we'll come home. She swallowed hard. Home. The word didn't mean her father's house anymore. It meant this: the smell of pine smoke, the warmth of fire, the steady heartbeat she'd learned to trust. She nodded. If you're with me, always. That night, as rain tapped gently on the roof, She lay beside him, unable to sleep. "Jace?" she whispered. Do you ever think we deserve peace?" He opened his eyes, turned toward her. "I don't know if we deserve it," he said, "but I know we've earned it." Outside, the storm grew louder, but inside, wrapped in his arms, Ava finally believed him. The morning they left the mountains, the world was hushed beneath a veil of mist. Ava stood beside Jace's horse, her shawl drawn close, eyes fixed on the trail that wound down into the valley. Every step toward Ravenswood felt like walking back into a nightmare. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. Jace adjusted the saddle and helped her mount. "You sure you're ready?" he asked quietly. Ava nodded, her voice steady though her heart raced. "They tried to bury me, Jace. I'm going to show them I'm still alive." He gave a small, fierce smile. "That's my girl." The town came into view by noon. Smoke from chimneys, the glint of the church bell, and the narrow main street that once whispered gossip about the fat Ashford girl. Heads turned as they rode in. A few gasped. Others crossed themselves. But Ava didn't flinch. She sat tall in the saddle, her chin lifted, her blue eyes bright and unafraid. At the courthouse, the sheriff, a heavy man with wary eyes, stared at her as though seeing a ghost. "Miss Ashford? Lord Almighty, we thought—" "I know what you thought," Ava interrupted. "Now I need a judge. Today." Behind her, Jace dismounted, his presence like a shadow made of stone. "And she'll need protection while she's here." The sheriff's gaze flicked between them, reading something in Jace's tone that told him not to argue. "Yes, sir." The hearing was brief, but the air inside the courthouse was thick with venom. Constance, Lucinda, Beatrice, and Malcolm sat at the front, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, as though they hadn't tried to murder the woman standing before them. When Ava entered, every head turned. Constance's painted smile faltered. Beatrice's fan slipped from her hand. Malcolm, pale and sweating, muttered something under his breath. Ava walked to the stand. "I, Evangeline Ashford, am alive, and I accuse my stepmother and her children of attempted murder." The judge's gavel struck once, the sound echoing like thunder. "These are grave charges, Miss Ashford. Do you have witnesses?" Jace stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "I saw the cliff. I saw the drag marks where they pushed her. I found her half dead, and I've spent the last 6 months keeping her alive. I'll swear that before God." The judge nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at the defendants. "And do you deny this, Mrs. Ashford?" Constance rose, her voice dripping with false grief. "Your Honor, this man is lying. My poor stepdaughter was troubled. She must have fallen by accident. We searched for days." "Liar," Ava said calmly. "You never searched. You celebrated." Her gaze locked on Malcolm. "Tell them what you said before you pushed me." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You can't prove anything." Jace took a step forward. "Want me to help you remember?" The sheriff quickly raised a hand. "Now, Mr. Thornfield." But he didn't need to, because Malcolm's bravado cracked first. "All right," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "She was supposed to die. It was her or us. Father left everything to her, and we had nothing." The courtroom gasped. Constance's face drained of color. The judge banged the gavel again, hard. "That's enough. Sheriff, take them into custody." As the family was dragged out screaming, Ava stood motionless. Her breath trembled, but her spine stayed straight. Jace placed a steadying hand at her back, the warmth of him grounding her to the earth. "It's done," he whispered. She nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "It's over." Outside, the town gathered as they stepped onto the courthouse steps. People whispered. Some offered shy smiles. Ava looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched her fall, and for the first time she felt weightless. Jace took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You're free now." She turned to him, smiling through her tears. "I was free the day you caught me." He leaned closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Then let's go home, my queen." Ava laughed softly, her heart full. The words didn't feel like fantasy anymore. She was his queen, not of crowns or courts, but of the quiet world they'd built in the mountains, where love had been born from the ashes of cruelty. They rode out of Ravenswood together, leaving behind the whispers, the pain, and the ghosts. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise. Ahead, the mountains waited, their kingdom, their peace, their forever. By the time they reached the mountains, autumn had begun its slow return. The leaves had turned to embers. The air carried the faint, sweet chill of change, and the world felt new, cleansed. Ava leaned against Jace as the horse climbed the familiar trail. Below them, the town was a speck swallowed by mist. Ahead, their cabin waited among whispering pines. It looked just as it had the day she first opened her eyes there, rough, quiet, strong. But now it no longer looked lonely. When they reached the clearing, Jace dismounted first and lifted her down with the same gentleness he'd had that first night. "Home," he murmured. Ava's eyes glistened. "Yes, home." Inside, the cabin felt alive again. The hearth, still blackened with old smoke, the shelves lined with jars she had filled that summer, the fiddle resting near the wall. She touched everything like it was sacred. Jace watched her with that small, crooked smile he tried to hide. "You know," he said softly, "this place used to be nothing but walls and silence. You turned it into something worth coming back to." She turned to him, her blue eyes shimmering in the firelight. "And you turned my fall into a beginning." He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until their breaths mingled. "You've changed everything I thought I knew about love, Ava. I thought love was something life took away from me, but you showed me it's something life can give back." Her hands trembled as they reached for his. "You caught me when the world wanted me gone. You didn't just save me, Jace. You chose me." He smiled, that slow, steady mountain man smile that melted every wall inside her. "I'll keep choosing you every day." She rose on her toes and kissed him, a quiet, tender kiss that spoke of survival, of forgiveness, of home. The fire crackled softly, wrapping them in warmth. Outside, the forest whispered through the pines as though blessing what it saw. Weeks later, they built a small cradle beside the hearth. Ava's belly had begun to round with life, and Jace's hands lingered protectively there each night as if to remind himself this miracle was real. "Do you think the world will ever stop testing us?" she asked one evening, resting her head on his shoulder. He smiled faintly. "I don't know, but I know we'll keep passing every test." "Together? Always?" The fire burned low, painting their faces in gold. Ava's eyes fluttered shut, and Jace whispered into her hair, "Sleep, my queen. The mountain's watching over us now." Outside, the stars hung low over their roof, silent witnesses to two souls who had found, against every cruelty of fate, a love strong enough to turn pain into peace. And as dawn touched the peaks, the cabin glowed like a promise, proof that even those who are pushed from the edge can learn to fly when someone chooses to catch them. Sometimes love doesn't arrive dressed in perfection. It comes from the wreckage, from a single moment when someone refuses to let you fall. Ava was pushed off a cliff, but that fall didn't end her story. It began it. Because when a heart finally meets kindness after a lifetime of cruelty, it learns how to bloom even in the coldest mountain. If this story reached you tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And if you still believe that broken souls can find home in each other, stay. The next story will find you soon.